So thanks for waiting, everybody. Uh, we can now enjoy Robert Lloyd Parry. We didn't want to have a conference about storytelling without a storyteller, so we're delighted to welcome him. Robert Lloyd Parry of Nunkey Productions. He's an interpreter in many modes. He's a writer who writes material for museums, galleries, heritage sites, publishing houses, production companies. He's also an actor, a scriptwriter, an adapter for stage and radio, and a performance storyteller. And it's in that capacity that he's with us today to read to us The Adventure of the Dying Detective. Thanks a lot, Robert. Please go.
Mrs. Hudson, the landlady of Sherlock Holmes, was a long-suffering woman. Not only was her first-floor flat invaded at all hours by throngs of singular and often undesirable characters, but her lodger showed an eccentricity in his daily life which must have sorely tried her patience. His incredible untidiness, his addiction to music at strange hours, his occasional indoor revolver practice, his weird and malodorous scientific experiments, and the atmosphere of violence which hung about him made him the very worst tenant in London. But the landlady stood in the deepest awe of him, you see. She never interfered, no matter how outrageous his proceedings might seem, and she was fond of him too. She was genuinely fond. He had a remarkable gentleness and courtesy in his dealings with women. He disliked and distrusted the sex, of course, but he was always chivalrous. Anyway, knowing how genuine was Mrs. Hudson's regard for my friend, it was with increasing dismay that I listened to her when she came to my rooms in my second year of married life and explained the sad condition to which he was reduced. "He's dying, Dr. Watson." "What?" "For 3 days he's been sinking, and I doubt he'll see tomorrow. He wouldn't let me get a doctor. But this morning, when I see his bones sticking out of his face and his great eyes looking at me, well, I couldn't stand it anymore. "With your leave or without it, Mr. Holmes, I'm going for a doctor this very hour," I said. "Then let it be Watson," he said. "Oh, hurry to him, Dr. Watson, hurry, or you may not see him alive again." I was utterly horrified. I'd heard nothing of this illness until that moment. I grabbed my coat and my hat, and as we drove to Baker Street, I demanded more details. "There's little I can tell you, sir. He's been working at a case down at Rotherhithe, and he's brought this illness back with him. He went to bed on Wednesday night, and he hasn't moved since. No food has passed his lips for 3 days, sir." "Well, good grief, Mrs. Hudson. Why didn't you call a doctor?" "He wouldn't have it, sir. Well, you know what he's like. I daren't disobey him. But he's not long for this world, as you'll see for yourself when you set eyes on him." He was indeed a deplorable sight. In the dim light of a foggy November day, the sick room was a gloomy enough spot anyway, but it was that gaunt, wasted face which sent a chill to my heart. "Well, Watson, we seem to have fallen on evil days," he croaked as I entered the room. "Oh, my dear fellow," I said, and I approached his bed to examine him. "Stand back! Stand right back, Watson. If you come any nearer, I shall order you out of the house." "But why?" "Because I desire it. Let that be enough." "Because I only wish to help you, Holmes." "And you will help me best by doing as you are told. Is that understood?" "Very well." I stepped back and he relaxed a little. "You're not angry with me, old man?" "Of course I'm not angry with you, Holmes. What do you take me for?" "I know what ails me, you see. It's a coolie disease. From Sumatra, yes. The Dutch know more about it than we do, although they can make precious little of it. Only one thing is certain. It is deadly, Watson. Infallibly deadly and horribly contagious. Contagious by touch, Watson. Do you understand me? By touch. Keep your distance and all is well." "What? Good heavens, Holmes! Do you suppose that weighs with me for an instant? I'm a doctor, for crying out loud. It wouldn't affect me in the case of a stranger. Do you imagine it'll prevent me doing my duty to my dearest friend? Again, I advanced, but again he repulsed me with a look of furious anger. If you stand exactly where you are, I will talk. If not, then you must leave the room. No, Holmes, I'm sorry. You're not yourself. A sick man is a child, and so I will treat you like a child. Like it or not, I've come to examine you, and examine you I will. Then, if I am to have a doctor, whether I will or not, let it at least be one in whom I have some confidence. Well, then you have no confidence in me. Oh, God, in your friendship, Watson, certainly. But, well, facts are facts. You're a general practitioner with limited experience and mediocre qualifications. I mean, it is painful to have to say these things, but you leave me no choice. Now, such a remark is unworthy of you, Holmes, and it shows me very clearly the state of your nerves. But very well, if you have no confidence in me, I will not intrude my services. But let me bring Sir Jasper Meek or Penrose Fisher or any of the best men in London, because someone you must have, Holmes, and that is final. If you think I'm simply going to stand here and watch you die, then you've mistaken your man. Oh, God, you mean well, Watson. But please now, let me demonstrate the depth of your ignorance. What do you know, tell me, of Tapanuli fever? Or the Black Formosa corruption? I've heard of neither, precisely. There are many problems of disease, Watson. Many strange pathological possibilities in the East. I have learned so much during recent investigations, and it was in the course of these that I contracted this complaint. You can do nothing for me, my friend, believe me. Well, possibly not, but I do know that Dr. Ainstree, the greatest living authority upon tropical disease, is now in London, and I'm going this instant to fetch him. I turned to the door and, God, never have I had such a shock. With a spring and a hiss like a tiger, the dying man was suddenly between me and the door. I heard the snap of the key in the lock, and then he staggered back to his bed, exhausted. I know you won't take the key from me by force, Watson. I've got you, my friend, and here you will stay until I say otherwise. But I will humor you, right? You shall have your way. Just give me time to gather my strength. It is 4 o'clock now. At 6, you may go and fetch help. This is insanity, Holmes. 2 hours, Watson. I promise you that you can go at 6. Now, are you content to wait? Well, it seems that I have no choice. None in the world, Watson. No. Now, let me rest. Oh, and there is one other condition that I must make. You will seek help, Watson, later today, but not from the man that you mention. When you go, you will summon someone of my own choosing. Very well. Good. Now, I am somewhat exhausted, my friend. You know where the newspapers are, I think. At 6. We will resume our conversation. Well, I stood for some minutes and I just watched that silent figure in his bed until he appeared to be asleep. And then, unable to settle down to reading, I wandered around the room. Oh, that old room that I'd once known so well. The walls were still adorned with framed pictures of celebrated criminals. The place didn't look like it had been dusted since I'd left 2 years earlier. Eventually, I came to the mantelpiece, and there was the usual debris scattered upon it, tobacco pouches, revolver cartridges, syringes. But in the midst of all this was something I'd not seen before. It was a small black and white ivory box with a sliding lid. It was a rather neat little thing, and I'd stretched out my hand to examine it more closely when, "Put that down! What? Put it down this instant, man!" I turned to see Holmes's furious eyes glaring at me from the bed. "Put it down now, I say!" But his head sank back upon the pillow, and he gave a deep sigh as I replaced the little box back on the mantelpiece. "I hate to have my things touched, Watson. You know that I hate it." Good grief, man, you fidget a man beyond endurance. You call yourself a doctor, you're enough to drive a man into an asylum. Now, will you just sit down, keep still, and let me have my rest? Well, the incident left a rather unpleasant impression, I must say. I mean, the violence and excitement, followed by this brutality of speech so far removed from his usual suavity. It showed me how very deep was the disorganization of his mind. Now, he was very, very sad, but you must believe me, ladies and gentlemen, when I tell you that of all ruins, that of a noble mind is the most deplorable. Anyway, I sat in silent dejection until the stipulated time had passed. Now, Holmes must have been watching the clock as well, because at precisely 6 o'clock, he began to talk with feverish animation. Oh, good, Watson, you have come about the oysters. What? They're not here, I'm afraid. In your absence, they have given me the slip. Who have? The oysters, man! The oysters! What oysters? The ones at the bottom of the ocean! Well, this was raving insanity. My dear Holmes, light the gas now. Good doctor, light the gas, but be certain that not for one instant shall it be more than half on. I implore you to be careful on that, good fellow. It is very important. And now, place some letters and papers on this bedside table beside me. Exactly. Splendid, splendid. And some of those items there from the mantelpiece. Oh, you are a very, very fine fellow. Now, there is a sugar tongs there, Watson, just there. Kindly use it to pick up that small ivory box and place it here among the papers. Splendid. Carefully does it. That's right. Now, go and fetch Mr. Culverton Smith from 13 Lower Burke Street. What? I mean, to be honest, my desire to fetch a doctor had somewhat weakened. I mean, Holmes was so obviously delirious that it seemed dangerous to leave him. But no, I mean, he was as eager now to consult the person named as he had been obstinate before in refusing my assistance. I've never heard of him, Holmes. Possibly not, my dear Watson. And it will doubtless surprise you to learn that the man most qualified to help me is not a medic, but a planter. Mr. Culverton Smith is a resident of Sumatra, now visiting London. An outbreak of this same disease upon his plantation some years ago caused him to study it with far-reaching consequences. He's a very methodical fellow, Watson, and I did not want you to start before 6 because I knew that you would not find him in his study. But if you could persuade him to come here tonight, old friend, I cannot doubt that he can help me. Now, you will tell him exactly how you have left me, Watson. You will convey the precise impression which is in your own mind of a dying man, a dying and delirious man. In fact, I cannot think why the whole world is not one solid mass of oysters, so prolific the creatures seem. So I'm wondering, what was I saying, Watson? You were giving me directions from Mr. Culverton Smith. Ah, yes. My life depends upon it. You plead with him, Watson. Implore him. Now, there is ill feeling between us, I'm afraid. His nephew, I had suspicions of foul play and I allowed him to see it. The boy died horribly. His uncle has a grudge against me, but you will soften him, Watson. Beg him. Pray to him. Get him here by any means. He alone can save me now. I will bring him in a cab if I have to carry him down to do it, Holmes. No, Watson. You will persuade him to come willingly, and then you will come back before him and make any excuse not to travel with him. Do not forget that, Watson. You won't fail me now. You never did before. I mean, you and I, old friend, we have done our part. Shall the whole world then be overrun by oysters? No, no, horrible. You may go now. And he handed me the key, and I left, full of the image of this magnificent intellect, babbling like a foolish child. Below, as I stood whistling for a cab, a man approached me through the fog. "How's Mr. Holmes, sir?" he asked. He was our old acquaintance, Inspector Morton of Scotland Yard, dressed in unofficial tweeds. "Oh, well, he's ill, I'm afraid, Morton. He's very ill." "Oh, dear," he said. "I'm sorry to hear that." He turned away, and had it not been too fiendish, I could have almost imagined that the gleam of the fanlight showed a look of exultation on his face. But, well, the cab drew up at that moment, and I left him. Now, Lower Burke Street proved to be a line of smart houses in the borderland between Notting Hill and Kensington. The door of number 13 was answered by a rather solemn-looking butler. "Yes, Mr. Culverton-Smith is in." "Very good, Dr. Watson. I will take up your card." My name and title did not, however, appear to impress Mr. Culverton-Smith. Through the open door came a high-pitched, petulant voice. "Who is this person, Staples? What does he want? Dear me, how often have I told you that I'm not to be disturbed in my hours of study?" There came a gentle flow of soothing explanation from the butler. "Yeah, well, I won't see him, Staples. I can't have my work interrupted like this. I'm not at home. Tell him to come in the morning if he wants to see me." Again, the gentle murmur. "Yeah, well, give him that message. He can come in the morning or he can stay away. My work must not be hindered." Now, I just thought of Holmes, shivering in his sickbed, sweating, counting the minutes until I could bring help to him. And, well, I decided that this was not the time to stand upon ceremony. Before the butler had a chance to deliver his message, I pushed past him and was inside the room. "What is this?" With a cry of anger, a man rose from a reclining chair beside the fire. I saw a great, greasy, yellow face with a heavy double chin, 2 sullen grey eyes, and a high bald head with a small velvet smoking cap poised coquettishly upon one side of its pink curve. "What is the meaning of this intrusion? Staples, get him out of here. I'm sorry, Mr. Smith, but this matter cannot be delayed. Mr. Sherlock Holmes was insistent that I..." "Sherlock Holmes?" The mention of my friend's name had the most extraordinary effect upon the man. The look of anger passed in an instant, and his features became tense and alert. "You come from Sherlock Holmes?" "Yes, I have just left him." "And how is Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" "He is ill, sir. He is desperately ill. That is why I have come." "Oh, I'm sorry to hear this. Please, be seated." He motioned me to a chair, and he resumed his own. "Of course, I only know Mr. Holmes very vaguely," he said, "through some business dealings that we have recently had, but I have every respect for his talents and for his character. He is an amateur of crime, as I am of disease. Yes, for him the villain, for me the microbe. These are my prisons." He pointed to a row of bottles and jars which stood on a side table. "Among these gelatine cultivations, Dr. Watson, some of the very worst offenders in the world are now doing time." "Yes, well," I said, it was on account of your special knowledge that Mr. Holmes desired to see you. He has a high opinion of you, Mr. Smith, and he thought that you could help him." The little man suddenly started, and his smoking cap slid to the floor. "Why should Mr. Holmes think that I could help him?" "Because of your knowledge of Eastern diseases." "But why should he think that his disease is Eastern?" "Because in some professional inquiry he has been working among Chinese sailors down on the docks." Ah, yes. Yes, I see." He smiled pleasantly and picked up his smoking cap. "Well, I trust that the matter is not so grave as you suppose. How long has he been ill?" "About 3 days." "And is he delirious?" "Occasionally." "And can he eat?" "He cannot." "Oh dear, poor man." Poor man. Well, it would be inhuman not to answer his call. I very much resent any interruption to my work, but this case is exceptional. I will come with you at once." Now, I remembered Holmes's injunction. "I have another appointment," I said. "Oh, well, very well, then I will go alone," he said. Yes, I know the address. Yes, I shall be there within half an hour." Goodbye, Dr. Watson, and thank you for delivering your message, sad as it was to hear. Well, it was with a sinking heart that I re-entered Holmes's bedroom, but to my relief, I actually found him greatly improved. I mean, his appearance was as ghastly as ever, but all trace of delirium seemed to have gone. Did you see him, Watson? Yes, he's on his way now. And did he ask what ailed me? Yes, I told him about the Chinese and the East End. Oh, admirable, Watson. You have done all that a friend could do. Thank you. Now disappear. What? No, I must hear his opinion, Holmes. Oh, God. Yeah, all right. Yes, I suppose you mustn't. All right. Listen, but I have reason to suppose, old friend, that Mr. Smith's opinion will be much more frank and valuable if he imagines that we are alone. There is just enough room, I think, behind the head of my bed. Holmes, there is no alternative, Watson. This room does not lend itself to concealment. But just there, Watson, I fancy it could be done. Suddenly he sat up. There are wheels, Watson. Quick, man, if you love me, and don't budge whatever happens. Do you hear me? Don't speak, don't move. Just listen. Listen with all your ears. In an instant, this sudden access of strength departed, and he began to drone and moan away in the low, vague murmurings of a semi-delirious man. Well, from the hiding place into which I'd been so swiftly hustled, I heard footsteps upon the stair, the opening and the closing of the bedroom door, and then a long silence, broken only by the heavy breathings and gaspings of the sick man. But at last, the hush was broken. Holmes? Holmes? There was a rustling as if he'd shaken the sick man by his shoulder. Can you hear me, Holmes? Ah, is that you, Smith? Oh, thank God. I hardly dared hope that you'd come. Oh, I should imagine not. And yet you see, here I am. Coals of fire, Sherlock Holmes. Coals of fire. It is indeed noble of you, and I appreciate your special knowledge. So, you know what is the matter with you, do you, Holmes? The same as Victor had. Ah, you recognize the symptoms. Only too well, yes. Well, I shouldn't be surprised if it were the same, Holmes. And a bad lookout for you if it is. Poor Victor was dead by the 4th day. A strong, hearty young fellow, too. It was certainly, as you said, very surprising that he should have contracted an out-of-the-way Asiatic disease in the heart of London. A disease, too, which I had made such a very special study. Singular coincidence, Holmes. Very smart of you to notice it. Rather uncharitable to suggest that it was cause and effect. I knew that you did it. Oh, you did you? And what do you think of yourself now, then, Mr. Holmes? Making accusations and crawling to me for help the moment you're in trouble? What sort of a game is that, eh? Suddenly Holmes began to choke. Give me water, he gasped. Oh, you are near the end, my friend. But I don't want you to go until I have had my say. So yes, I shall give you some water. There you are. Don't slop it about, you clumsy ape. Do what you can for me, Smith, I implore you. But let bygones be bygones. Only cure me, and I will forget it. Forget what? About Victor Savage's death. Have you as good as admitted just now that you killed him? I will forget it, I promise. You can forget it or remember it just as you like, Holmes. I don't see you in the witness box. Quite another shaped box, in fact, old fellow. Quite another shaped box. I mean, it matters nothing to me that you should know how my nephew died. It's not him that we're talking about, it's you. Now, that buffoon that you sent to fetch me, I've forgotten his name, he said that you contracted this down in the East End among the sailors. I could only account for it so. Proud of your brains, aren't you, Holmes? Eh? Think yourself rather smart, don't you? Well, you came across somebody who was smarter this time. Now, cast your mind back. Can you think of no other way that you could have got this thing? I can't think, Smith. My mind is gone. For heaven's sake, help me, man. Oh, I intend to help you, Holmes. I'm going to help you understand just where you are and how you got there. I'd like you to know before you die. Holmes moaned. Yeah, painful, isn't it? Yeah, the coolies used to do some squealing towards the end, I remember. Takes you as a cramp, I fancy. Well, you can hear what I say anyhow. Now listen to me. Can you remember any unusual happening at about the time that your symptoms began? No, nothing. Think again. I'm too ill to think. Then I will help you. Did anything come by post, perhaps? Maybe a little box. Another groan. Listen, Holmes. Listen to me. Now, there will be plenty of time to die in a moment. Do you remember a box? A small ivory box. It came on Wednesday by post. You opened it. Do you remember? Yes. Yes, I opened it. There was a sharp spring inside, some kind of a joke. Oh, it was no joke, Holmes. As you will soon find to your cost. I remember there's this spring, it drew blood. That box there, the one on the table. The very one, by George. And it may as well leave this room in my pocket. There goes your last shred of evidence, Mr. Detective. But you have the truth now, at any rate. And now you can die with the knowledge that I killed you. You knew too much of the fate of Victor Savage, so I have sent you to join it. You're very near your end now, Holmes. You know, I think that I will sit here and watch your final moments. Do you mind if I smoke? Holmes's voice had sunk to an almost inaudible whisper. What's that? Said Smith. Turn up the gas. Oh, the shadows begin to creep, do they, Holmes? Very well. He crossed the room and the light suddenly brightened. Now, is there any other little final service that I can perform for you, my friend? Well, I rather fancy one of those cigarettes, if you have a spare one. What? I nearly called out for amazement. Holmes was speaking in his natural voice. There was a long pause, and then Culverton Smith stuttered. What is the meaning of this? Well, you see, Smith, said Holmes, I've always found that the best way of successfully acting a part is to become it. Yes, I give you my word that for 3 days I have tasted neither food nor drink until you were good enough to pour me out that glass of water. But you see, it's the tobacco that I really missed. Do you mind? I heard a deep inhalation. Ah, yes. That is very much better. And hello. I do believe I hear the clumsy tread of Scotland Yard upon the stair. There were footfalls outside, and the door opened. This is your man, Inspector Morton. To save an invalid the trouble, Mr. Culverton Smith was good enough to give our signal by turning up the gas himself. Yes, it was jolly helpful of him, wasn't it? Well, by the way, he has a small box in the right-hand pocket of his coat, which it would be as well to remove. I'd handle it rather carefully if I were you. It may play its part in our trial. And now there was a sudden scuffle and a rush, and then the click of a pair of handcuffs closing. Stand still, will you, sir? Said Morton. You'll only get yourself hurt. A nice trap, cried Smith's high, snarling voice. Yeah, well, it will bring you into the dock, Holmes, not me. Inspector, this fraud asked me to come here to cure him. I felt pity, so I came. Now he will pretend, no doubt, that I have said anything which he may invent to corroborate his insane suspicions. Well, you can lie as much as you like, Holmes. My word is always as good as yours. You'll see. Good heavens, cried Holmes suddenly. Thank you, Smith. I had totally forgotten. My dear Watson, 1,000 apologies. To think that I could have forgotten about you. Come out from there, old man. It must be terribly uncomfortable. Now, I believe that you've already met Mr. Culverton Smith. Mr. Inspector Morton, of course, you know already. By the way, Smith, have you still got your cab below? Might we use it, do you think? Inspector Morton, Watson and I will follow you in Mr. Smith's cab when I'm dressed. I suspect that we might be of some use down the station. Ah, I never needed it more, said Holmes as he refreshed himself with a large glass of claret in the intervals of his toilet. But, well, as you know, Watson, my habits are irregular anyway, and a starvation diet means less to me than to most men. It was essential, you see, that I should convince Mrs. Hudson about the reality of my condition, since she was to convey it to you, and you in turn to Smith. Now, you're not offended, are you, old man? Oh, come on. I mean, you'll admit yourself, I'm sure, that among your many talents, dissimulation finds no place. If you had shared my secret, you'd never have been able to impress Smith with the urgent necessity of his presence, and that was the point of the whole scheme. Knowing his vindictive nature, I was certain that he would come to look upon his handiwork. But your appearance, Holmes, your ghastly face, all right. Well, 3 days of fasting is nothing to improve one's beauty, Watson. A sponge shall cure the rest. With Vaseline upon one's forehead, belladonna in one's eyes, and crusts of beeswax around one's lips, a very satisfying effect can be produced. And then a little bit of chit-chat about oysters and so forth always produces a pleasing effect of delirium. Yet malingering is actually a subject which I sometimes thought of writing a monograph. But well, why wouldn't you let me near you, Holmes, if there was no infection? Now, can you seriously ask me that, my friend? Do you imagine that I've really no respect for your medical talents? I mean, could I fancy that your astute judgment would pass as dying a man who, however weak, had no rise of pulse or temperature? Now, at 4 yards, I could deceive you, my good doctor, but no closer. And if I failed to convince you, who else would bring Smith within my grasp? And it was clear to me that only by pretending that he'd succeeded in his design might I surprise a confession. And that pretense I have carried out, I rather think, with the thoroughness of the true artist. Now, come on, Watson. Hurry up with your coat. When we finish at the police station, I think that something nutritious at Simpson's would not be out of place. I don't know about you, but I'm rather in the mood for oysters.
Thanks so much, Robert. That was fantastic. Well worth waiting for. It's a brilliant reminder of what a splendid dramatic writer Conan Doyle was, and also a comic writer.
Yeah.
And also a very good reminder of what an excellent fellow Dr. Watson is.
Yes, yeah, quite, yeah.
So thank you very much indeed for joining us. It's really put the
well, thank you for having me
on our day's procedures. Many thanks, Robert.
Sorry about the delay.
That's no problem. That's fine. We've got plenty of time. We're now going to have a break until about 15 minutes. We'll resume with our last item at 6 o'clock. That's going to be a roundtable on the edition. So thanks a lot. Have a break for 15 minutes. Thanks, Robert. Bye.
Thank you.